Donald Trump has just been struck by a new and unexpected shock from the Supreme Court, one that arrived not in whispers, not in leaked memos, and not through the usual machinery of political rivalry. No, this blow unfolded in the open, under the bright lights of the courtroom, recorded line by line for the entire world to witness. And here is the irony. The very justices he helped elevate, the same institution he believed he understood, perhaps even believed he had secured for decades, are now openly questioning the legal foundation of one of the most powerful economic weapons any modern president possesses. This is not speculation. This is not cable news commentary or partisan analysis. These are the words of the Supreme Court itself, carved directly into the transcript for the entire nation to read. And when the Supreme Court signals something, especially something of this magnitude, it stops being politics. It becomes part of the machinery that actually governs presidential power. It becomes structural. It becomes real. What most people interpret as chaos, I see as something far more familiar, something I have watched unfold for decades. It is that quiet, heavy moment when an institution pushes back. It is the moment when the system itself reminds even a sitting president that its boundaries still hold, and that those boundaries can tighten without warning. I have spent the majority of my life reading markets, reading people, and reading signals. And the signal that came out of this courtroom was anything but subtle. The justices weren't hedging. They weren't hinting. They weren't playing political games. They were directly challenging the idea that one person, any president, can unilaterally reshape global trade through emergency powers alone. Their focus wasn't on personality. It wasn't on the noise of campaigns or rallies. It was on the text, on the law, on what the statute actually allows, and more importantly, what it does not allow. That is where the shock originates. Not from drama, not from emotion, but from structure. Markets have lived for years under a very specific assumption that the President of the United States could wake up one morning, declare an economic threat, and impose sweeping tariffs that would instantly alter supply chains, cost structures, and competitive landscapes. Whether you agreed with those decisions or hated them never mattered to the market. The market only cared that the authority existed and that the power was stable. Trillions of dollars moved based on that assumption. And suddenly, after this hearing, that assumption is no longer settled. When the highest court in the country starts pressing the limits of emergency-based tariff powers, it sends a shockwave through every boardroom, every investment firm, every supply chain hub, and every corner office across the economy. Because rules, not personalities, are the backbone of capital allocation. Investors can handle bad news. They can handle higher taxes, tighter regulations, even geopolitical chaos. What they cannot handle is uncertainty over who holds the pen. When the rules wobble, markets tremble. Let me explain exactly why this particular legal question is so destabilizing. The global economy today moves at a speed most people cannot appreciate. Goods cross continents in hours. Capital crosses borders in fractions of a second. And for years, the United States has relied heavily on a specific set of emergency powers that allow a president to impose tariffs faster than Congress can meet, faster than committees can negotiate, and faster than lobbyists can mobilize. That speed wasn't a flaw. It was the feature. It gave the executive branch the ability to use economic leverage as an immediate, decisive instrument. But today, the justices targeted that very feature. They asked whether the law actually permits that kind of velocity without Congress, without debate, and without legislative input. The uncertainty alone is enough to rattle every market built on that speed. Imagine you're a manufacturer. You invest hundreds of millions of dollars into expanding a plant, hiring workers, building furnaces, and adding new machinery, all based on the assumption that foreign competitors will remain taxed at a certain rate. That assumption becomes the foundation of your business model. And then, in one courtroom hearing, that foundation is questioned. No ruling yet, just questions. But questions are enough. Balance sheets shift, expansion plans freeze, risk models are rewritten, markets move. Every investor knows how to price good news and bad news. But the hardest thing to price, the thing that keeps CFOs awake at night, is a fundamental question. Who actually has the authority? And how far does it reach? That uncertainty is what emerged today. And now we move to the heart of the shock Donald Trump faces. It is not personal, it is structural. The court he shaped through appointments and ideological alignment has now reminded the country that its loyalty is to the law, not to any president. What happened today is a profound institutional statement. The presidency cannot assume that emergency powers will automatically be upheld simply because precedent has leaned that way for decades. The justices didn't reinforce Trump's assumptions. They challenged them, and markets listened. Every corporation in America with exposure to tariff-sensitive industries is now quietly asking the same three questions. What if this authority is narrowed? What if past tariffs face new legal scrutiny? What if future tariffs require Congress? These are not small questions. These are billion-dollar questions, and capital, like water, flows around any obstacle the moment it senses a crack. It doesn't wait for the dam to collapse. It moves when it sees the first drop leak through. That is exactly what is happening right now. Now, let's go deeper because there is another layer of this shock that most commentators will completely miss. Markets don't simply react to what is said. They react to who says it. If these probing questions had come from the liberal wing of the court, markets might have shrugged. But these questions came from conservative justices, some appointed by Trump himself. That changes everything, because it signals that the skepticism is not ideological. It is textual. It is constitutional. And that is the kind of skepticism you cannot spin away on television or override through politics. You cannot negotiate with the text of the law. That is why today hit like a jolt. The mechanism that allowed a president to reshape global trade overnight, the mechanism that industries have relied on for years, suddenly looks fragile. Global competitors see it too. Foreign governments and sovereign wealth funds watch this hearing closely, analyzing every question and every hesitation. What they saw was a Supreme Court asserting itself in the arena of economic power. And that perception alone shifts international dynamics. If foreign competitors believe the U.S. president no longer has unilateral speed, their fear of sudden retaliation decreases, their confidence increases, their negotiating posture strengthens. That shift influences global trade long before any ruling is issued. Because leverage is not just about power, it is about perceived power. Now, let's shift from the international stage back to Washington itself. Specifically, let's talk about Congress. Under the Constitution, it is Congress, not the president, that regulates foreign commerce. Emergency powers were always meant to be narrow exceptions. But over decades, presidents expanded those exceptions into routine tools. Markets adapted. Industries relied on them. But when the Supreme Court questions that expansion, Congress senses an opening. Some lawmakers see a chance to reclaim lost authority. And when Congress becomes involved, trade policy becomes slow, unpredictable, and tangled with political compromise. For a logistics firm or a manufacturing business, that is a nightmare. You cannot plan a factory expansion based on a tariff that Congress might debate for 6 months. This is why the smart money, the disciplined money, is already repositioning. This is the great hesitation. Not panic, but a pause, a deep analytical silence as companies and investors digest the new landscape. Now let's turn inward toward investors at home. For the everyday investor, the instinct when hearing that the Supreme Court questioned a president's economic power is fear. But fear is emotional. Markets are not emotional. Weak companies rely on government protection. Strong companies rely on fundamentals. When protection becomes uncertain, the economy sharpens. It becomes Darwinian. Weak companies fall. Strong companies rise. And investors who understand that Shift early, benefit the most. Now, let's return briefly to the presidency itself. Presidents expect affirmation from the courts. They expect validation. But the Supreme Court is not an ally or an adversary. It is a referee. It reads the rule book and blows the whistle when a line is crossed. That is not a punishment. It is a balance. And balance strengthens the system over the long run. But in the short term, it creates volatility. Trump has relied heavily on rapid, aggressive economic tools. Investors have priced in that speed. But when the court questions the authority behind that speed, uncertainty spreads through every sector touched by tariffs. All of this leads us to the question, what comes next? There are three possible paths. Path 1, the court upholds broad authority. Markets stabilize quickly. It's the cleanest resolution, but based on the tone of the hearing, possibly the least likely. Path 2, the court narrows the authority. This forces massive recalibration in every trade-sensitive industry. Tariff power becomes slower, more procedural, and harder to justify. Path 3, the court tells Congress to clarify. This is the most chaotic scenario. It produces prolonged uncertainty because Congress moves slowly and markets hate slow. But in every scenario, clarity eventually returns. And when clarity returns, opportunity appears. Investors should rotate, not retreat. Move away from companies dependent on political protection and toward companies with intrinsic competitive strength. Utilities, healthcare, consumer staples, infrastructure, these thrive in uncertain environments. So do companies with fortress balance sheets and little debt. The administration, too, must adapt. If one tool becomes uncertain, a new strategy must replace it. Adaptation is the essence of leadership. Let me tell you something I have learned after nearly a century of watching markets rise and fall. Shocks do not destroy markets. Denial does. Investors who cling to old assumptions get crushed. Investors who adapt prosper. And here is the final truth. Markets are not emotional. People are. Markets do not fear uncertainty. They price it in. The Supreme Court did not destabilize the system. It reinforced it. It strengthened the rule of law, which is the backbone of every enduring market. That is why I am not pessimistic today. I am watching, analyzing, waiting. Because when the dust settles, clarity will return. And clarity is where fortunes are built. The panicked investor sells when the question is asked. The disciplined investor invests when the answer arrives. Right now, we are simply in the question phase. The system is recalibrating. The markets are adjusting. The structure is shifting. And the opportunities that follow this shock will reward those who stay disciplined, stay calm, and stay focused on fundamentals, not noise. This is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of a new phase, a more balanced, more durable phase. One where strong companies thrive, weak companies fall. And the investors who understand structure, not emotion, build wealth that endures beyond any president, any administration, and any single Supreme Court hearing.